If we think the college campuses are bad now for pro-Israel students, just wait until these children graduate from these schools and have been marinated in this hatred starting at pre-kindergarten.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Tobin, Editor-in-Chief of the Jewish News Syndicate, jns.org, and you're listening to Top Story, a weekly podcast where I analyze the most important stories happening in Jewish news around the world. Each week, I will break down politics, foreign policy, and culture to provide insights into what is going on behind the headlines. Hello, and welcome to Top Story. Thank you for joining us. We've got a lot to talk about and a fascinating interview to get to. But before we start, I want to encourage everyone to like this video, subscribe to JNS, and hit the bell for notifications. Also, we would love to hear from you. Please write to us at editor@jns.org and let us know where you listen or watch the show and what you think about it. A quick programming note. We'll be off next week for the July 4th holiday. Top Story will return the following 2 weeks in July, with the great Melanie Phillips stepping in to host the show while I'm on vacation. I'll return with our July 28th podcast. And now to our show for today. There was much gnashing of teeth among liberals this week when the United States Supreme Court handed down yet another decision protecting freedom of religion and parental rights in the case of Carson versus Megan. The case concerns the situation in some rural counties in the state of Maine that do not have their own public high schools. The state allows those counties to arrange for the education of those students who are affected by this situation by either contracting with a neighboring public school or by paying for tuition at a private school of the parents' choice. The parents who choose a religious rather than a secular private venue for their children to attend got nothing. Affected parents sued, and ultimately a 6-3 majority of the court agreed with them that Maine's law violated their rights. As Chief Justice John Roberts wrote in the majority opinion, states are not required to subsidize religious education, but if they are going to subsidize private schools, they may not discriminate against religious institutions. But that's exactly what the left wants to do. And while they may have once supported discrimination against faith because of misguided interpretations of the Constitution, recently the argument for trying to starve religious schools of the funds they need has become about something else. As leftist ideologues spread toxic theories about race, history, sex, and gender in the schools, the need to preserve and to grant equality to schools who resist these disastrous trends has become all the more important. The decision in Carson versus Megan sparked outrage from liberal groups like the Anti-Defamation League, which contributed to a brief on behalf of the losing side in the case and continues to fuel the delusion that allowing religion to thrive in the public square will somehow endanger Jews. In dissent, outraged liberal Justice Sonia Sotomayor claimed that the court, which has steadfastly defended religious liberty in a series of cases over the past 2 decades, is dismantling, quote, the wall of separation between church and state that the framers fought to build, unquote. Just as angry was retiring Justice Stephen Breyer, who claimed the sectarian nature of religious schools, including their opposition to fashionable beliefs about, quote, gender identity, sexual orientation, and religion, should render them ineligible for equal treatment. This is familiar territory for those who have followed the debate about school choice. For decades, advocates of schemes that seek to break the government monopoly on public education and to also end the discrimination against private religious education have fought against those who continue to uphold the principle of a high wall of separation. The first thing to say about Justice Sotomayor's comment is that it is fiction. The founders of the American Republic made it very clear that while they opposed the establishment of a state religion, they had no desire to drive, as contemporary liberals do, faith out of the public square. With the exception of Thomas Jefferson, who coined the phrase wall of separation many years after the Constitution and the Bill of Rights were written and adopted, the notion that they regarded religion as something that had no role to play in public life is a myth. As John Adams wrote, quote, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other," unquote. Nor was there any other thought then that public education would shun religion. The Bible and religion were staples of public education right up until the aftermath of the Second World War, when the movement to ban prayer in school began to gain support in the courts. The ban on public support for religious schools had nothing to do with the founders' views. It was not until a century later, when states began to pass so-called Blaine amendments, ironically named after a senator from Maine, James G. Blaine, to their own constitutions that prohibited funding for religious schools. The movement that pushed for these measures was motivated by anti-Catholic bigotry, as large numbers of immigrants arrived in the country and sought an alternative to public schools, which then invariably had a Protestant orientation. Supporters of these amendments had no problem with the sort of non-Catholic instruction most public schools retained up until the mid-20th century. Up until recently, the pendulum had swung very far in the direction of secularism, leading to justified concerns that the Roberts-led court has repeatedly addressed, that the other part of the First Amendment that guaranteed the right of free exercise of religion is being violated by an aggressive secularism that sought to drive religious belief into the margins of society. But as Breyer's dissent makes clear, this argument is no longer solely a function of the debate about church and state. The issue is not merely the nature of the schools, but what is being taught in them. With critical race theory indoctrination, ethnic studies courses that are steeped in intersectionality and ideas about white privilege, the use of the New York Times' fallacious 1619 project to teach history, and the introduction into compulsory education of new curricula about sexual and gender identity, a new, even more urgent element has been added to these debates about school funding and separation. It's necessary to understand that what we have been witnessing in education is not just a revolution that has introduced a raft of fashionable, woke concepts into the educational sphere. Rather, it is an effort to grant a set of beliefs rooted in Marxism as nothing less than a secular state religion. Moreover, it is a faith that, like medieval religions of all sorts, tolerates no dissent. The willingness to brand all those who object to the woke catechism as racists and bigots isn't merely a matter of pique on the part of leftists who are outraged by opposing views. It is characteristic of any true believer when confronted with heretics. Rabbi Isaac Meyer Wise, a leading figure in 19th century American Jewry, once referred to public schools as temples of liberty. But as many of them adopt these new woke curricula, it's clear that all too many public schools have become the opposite of that lofty aspiration. At a time when liberals are prepared, as Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel recently quipped, to put a drag queen in every school, in order to enforce their dogmas and to smear even common sense rules about keeping sex and gender indoctrination out of classrooms for children from grades K to 3, it was the case with a Florida law as the "don't say gay" homophobia, then it's time to realize just how high the stakes have become in these tussles over schools and support for religious education. What we need now is not so much to ensure that the separation between religion and state is not so high as to burden the free exercise of religion, as some on the left clearly want. Rather, what we need is to separate the state from the new secular woke religion on race, sex, and gender. These disastrous ideas seek to divide us far more than traditional faiths do. Malevolent forces that have included unions, political activists, and politicians have sought to make these toxic concepts compulsory fare for all children. The Supreme Court is rightfully upholding the First Amendment's defense of our first freedom, the right to religious liberty. Those schools that provide parents with an alternative to the new putative state religion whether secular or religious, need as much support as we can give to them. And now to our interview of the week. There is a multitude of evidence that, contrary to the claims of some on the left, that there is no critical race theory indoctrination going on in the public schools. But there is no better proof of what is going on than the situation in California schools with respect to ethnic studies courses. While an initial curriculum that not only promoted CRT and intersectional beliefs, but open anti-Semitism into the schools was defeated, that same sort of toxic doctrine is being snuck into public education by a coalition of forces led by a group promoting what it calls liberated ethnic studies. That effort has provoked an important lawsuit filed by parents and teachers who don't want their children indoctrinated by those seeking to spread ideas about race and white privilege that is inherently divisive, racist, and anti-Semitic. To speak about this lawsuit and the issue, we're fortunate to have with us today Lori Lowenthal Marcus. Ms. Marcus is legal director of the Deborah Project, a public interest law firm that represents those who have been discriminated against in educational settings because they are Jewish and or pro-Israel. Former journalist as well as a graduate of Harvard Law, she has served a number of Jewish groups and causes, perhaps most notably as the international Zionist organization Z Street, which she founded, on behalf of which she also sued the IRS after it refused to consider Z Street's application for tax-exempt status in violation of the U.S. Constitution. Lori Lowenthal Marcus, welcome to Top Story.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Well, thank you for coming on. Thank you for joining us. Lori, I want to start by asking you to explain to us the background of the debate about ethnic studies curricula in California. There was an initial effort to force through a curricula that was openly hostile to Jews, but which ultimately was thrown out by Governor Gavin Newsom and the legislature. It was replaced by something that was seemingly better, but contrary to the self-congratulatory statements from Jewish groups at that time, that's not where it ended, was it? So could you take it from there?
Sure. Actually, I'm going to go back a little bit further,
Please.
if I may.
Sure.
Ethnic studies as a field of study, something that was recognized in the education system in the United States, pretty much started in the 60s. And it started with the Third World Liberation Front. And there were strikes in the schools, particularly San Francisco State University, over the fact that people didn't feel represented. Serious strikes, like semester-long strikes, a lot of hostility and anger. So various demands were made, and the ultimate compromise was to start a school of ethnic studies or a department within San Francisco State University. Because that was the genesis of this discipline, the groups that made the most noise at the protests and strikes felt as though they were entitled to be the ones, the drivers for this discipline. So it's Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, Native Americans, and Asian American Pacific Islanders. So those are the four groups. It's
in essence the protected classes that saw this as their property.
Exactly. It's their property and nobody else's, even if you happen to be another minority or ethnic group. So the law that passed, the problematic part of it, as you mentioned, Jonathan, was not the curriculum. It was a model curriculum. It was not the law. It was an example of what could be used. And it had a lot of problems, amongst them virulent anti-Semitism. As you pointed out, the model curriculum was removed, thrown out, and educators were forced to go back to the drawing board, new educators. and they came up with a subsequent model curriculum, which means it's just a model. Every school district in California is allowed to have their own curriculum. They don't have to use the model one. That's one issue. The folks who created the first model curriculum, the one that was problematic, they totally reject the new form, the new model curriculum, and they created their own consortium. And they believe, or at least they say it very convincingly, that they are the only ones teaching authentic ethnic studies. They're not interested in multiculturalism. They're not interested in diversity. They want their version of ethnic studies.
Now, that's a very important point, because I think most of us assume that the left is all for multiculturalism. Diversity is one of their mantras, diversity, equity, and inclusion. But they're not too inclusive, are they?
Exactly. They are adamantly not inclusive. They are very upfront about saying, this is our turn. The problem happened. We were the ones who lifted it up. We are the ones who fixed it. It's now our turn to tell our lived experiences and introduce everyone else, the non-for protected classes, introduce them all. The way they benefit is they get to learn about us through our stories. So that's
and they don't want this to be about learning about anybody else.
Well, actually, it's even worse. They do want it to be about learning about others, but only negative things. They're the oppressed minorities. And look, there has been racism from the beginning of time, and there still is. And that's a problem and should be addressed. No question about it. But rather than celebrate their own cultures, and God forbid, include other cultures also, they mostly talk about the oppression of the capitalists, the colonialists, the, et cetera, the ableists, fill in all the blanks. And that's what they're opposed to.
This sounds very much like critical race theory instruction and indoctrination. This is about dividing people. It's not about, really isn't so much about celebrating Latinos or African Americans or Asian Americans or Native Americans. This is about putting it in a ideological context in which we're all divided by race, isn't it?
Oh, 100%. And in fact, they admit it. This Liberated group has a website which has been denuded in recent months, but they still say, yes, this is critical race theory. That's what we're doing. That's what this is about. And that's what everyone has to learn.
Now, tell us about Liberated Ethnic Studies and their curricula and why it's so bad. Exactly what is this group about?
Well, as I said, it's about bringing up these four racialized, which is how they refer to it. They're four racialized groups, and their way of doing that, as I said, is to denigrate anyone who isn't in those groups for being oppressors, and for being,
in other words, everybody else has privilege.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And in essence, white privilege. Yeah, white privilege, even if some of these groups, like Jews, were themselves discriminated against during the course of American history. Right? It's about dividing us between oppressors and victims. And regardless of the actual history, if you're not counted as one of the victims, you're one of the oppressors.
Absolutely. That's the problem for everyone. It really impoverishes what should be a celebration of the many different ethnicities in American culture. So It's problematic in terms of what they choose to teach, how they choose to teach it, and what they choose to exclude. The premise is that it's essential for everyone to understand how these racialized groups have been oppressed throughout American history. So it's oppression in America. Now is the twist that the organization with which I work, the Deborah Project, comes in, because we represent people who have been discriminated against in educational settings because they're Jewish and or pro-Israel. So how does that work in this context? The why Israel is included, and the flip side of Israel bad, Palestine and Palestinians good. But you have to ask yourself, as we did, and as we ask in the complaint, what does that have to do with any kind of oppression in American history? It doesn't. It's just shoehorned in a very bizarre way. It's a form of, they don't like allies, they like comrades. So they're comrades with the Palestinian people of color, for being indigenous people who have been oppressed by the European settlers. So they set it up in parallel, but they're foolish in terms of, when they limited it to the four groups who've been oppressed in America, how then do you justify bringing in Palestinians as another victim group, and they put them in the Asian American Pacific Islander group?
Yeah, which is
Just
an interesting distinction. So, who literally, what groups are behind this liberated ethnic studies, and how do they operate, and why, what have they done that provoked this, that caused the suit, to be necessary?
well, those are a couple different questions there.
Okay, well, answer them one at a time then. Who is liberated ethnic studies? Who's promoting it? Who's getting it into the schools, sort of by the back door?
Okay, so as I said, it's the same people and their comrades who drafted the original model curriculum for California. There's a fairly large group of educators. They're, I believe, all teachers, either in elementary school, high school, and some are at universities. And there are, in California in particular, I'm not sure about the rest of the country, how much it lines up, but there's a school of ethnic studies and there are departments of ethnic studies. And so they're experts who insist, this is like a science. You have to learn only this, their version qualifies as ethnic studies. And so only their version can be taught in the schools consistent with what the statute, which ultimately was passed, the requirement that every graduating student in public school in California has to have had at least one ethnic studies course. Now, the reason it's a problem is because there were a lot of people, as you said, Jonathan, a lot of, in particular, Jews, also Armenians and others, who really protested the first version of the model curriculum. And so some people were alert and thought this might be a problem still, despite the premature celebrations. Mm-hmm. And in fact, if you just go to the website, or at least went to the website, I started looking at the liberated ethnicstudies.org website a year ago, May. They're very upfront about it. This is authentic. What the government has done is not. This is what we're teaching. In the Asian American Pacific Islanders, we have teachpalestine.org. That's part of the curriculum. They also have materials posted on their website, or did, that this is liberatory teaching. Not everyone will be happy with it. If you have an administrator in your school or parents who may not be look upon this well, you should shut your door and teach it behind closed doors and keep it below the radar so that you can make sure this version of ethnic studies is spread. Educators are taught this in institutes given by the liberated group. And those teachers who are taught this version of ethnic studies then go into the classrooms and they're teaching it. So, one of the problems we had, some people said, well, Los Angeles, the school district, hasn't entered into a contract with the liberated group. True. But it's coming into the classroom. We know it. The liberated groups are saying it. And the head of the consortium is a teacher in Los Angeles Unified School District. And she teaches ethnic studies. So it's ridiculous to say, oh, well, we don't know if it's there yet. It's there. And so we began to hear about it because initially there was a BDS resolution making its way through the teachers union for Los Angeles. And once we started looking at what was happening in Los Angeles School District and amongst teachers and parents, we then learned about this and we realized this is really a very serious problem. It's not only in Los Angeles, it's portions of it are right throughout California. And there have been school districts which have already signed contracts for tens of thousands of dollars and even $100,000 to train the teachers in this form of ethnic studies. And there's now a national consortium. So it's in lots of different states at nascent stages already.
Now, what's really interesting to me is that on the one hand, as they're kind of, as I said, sneaking it in through the back door, as you noted, they're like closing the doors. They are not doing this in a sort of transparent way. They are not announcing it in, sort of in school board meetings or in public forums. They're just doing it. They're, trying to shove this down without going through any democratic process. I mean, there was this whole debate over the model curriculum in the California legislature in which groups weighed in and it became a whole political controversy. There's no debate about this. It's just happening.
Well, in some places, it's just happening. In some places, it's right out there above board. It's on the agenda for a school board in Castro Valley, which is a school district in California. I don't know yet how it happened, but a contract with the consortium came to the school board. It was publicized. Lots of parents showed up in the Zoom meeting. Most of them were Jews who complained bitterly and asked the school board to reject the contract, at the end of which all 5 school board members voted for it. So that wasn't subtle. That was right out there.
Mm-hmm.
And
so the kind of 2 different tracks for this controversy. Some places
right.
under the table and some places over it.
Exactly. And they're making a lot of money. They're also peddling this material to schools and saying, okay, now you're required by California law to offer these courses, and we're the only experts. So we'd be happy to provide trainings to your teachers and lesson plans, etc. And the truth is that statement is not true. There are lots of courses already given in the schools that can qualify as an ethnic studies course. But when you are, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, overworked and have a lot of regulations to deal with, this is an easy way to get out or to fulfill your obligations. The problem is it's very dangerous. And our position is that the kinds of materials that's in the Palestine portion of the curriculum is is really dangerous for Jews. I'll give you an example if you want.
Please.
Okay. Last May, during the conflict in Gaza, there were lots of people across the country who were very upset and identified with and empathized with the Gazans. And in Los Angeles, there were caravans of cars with Palestinian flags waving that were driving through Jewish neighborhoods. And one night, as these caravans were driving through this particular neighborhood, a car stopped. A bunch of protesters jumped out. They had been yelling, "Israel murders Palestinians. Israel murders children and women." They jumped out at a restaurant where people were dining outside, and what they did was they said, "Who are the Jews?" And they went to beat them up. They didn't say, "Who are the Israelis?" They said, "Who are the Jews?" And some people did get beaten up. So people conflate the two. If they're angry at the Jewish state, what they have at hand are Jews. And what the curriculum does is say over and over again that Israel is a colonialist, settler, white state that engages in apartheid, genocide, and land theft. And the Palestinians are the indigenous people. And the definition of apartheid includes what happens in Israel. That's in the lesson plans for kids. And settlers are defined as Jews who have stolen the land and the homes of the indigenous Palestinians. So it's really ugly. And that encouraged us to look into this carefully and bring this lawsuit.
Yeah, I think it's very important. This is not about criticism, teaching about a debate about Israel. This is straight out of the BDS anti-Semitic playbook. The lie that Israel's an apartheid state, the lie that the Palestinians are the indigenous people, that Jews are not indigenous to the land of Israel, the lie that Jewish Israelis are white, when the majority of them are actually, by the definition of sort of the woke left in the United States, people of color, because they trace their origins. The majority of Israeli Jews trace their origins to the Middle East and North Africa. This is a sort of a farrago, a raft of lies, and it all amounts to anti-Semitism, because they're treating Israel and denying Jewish rights in a way they would not deny them to any other people on the face of the earth. And this is now being put into a school curriculum.
That's right. If we think the college campuses are bad now for pro-Israel students, just wait until these children graduate from these schools and have been marinated in this hatred, starting at pre-kindergarten. That's when the curriculum starts, pre-kindergarten through 12th grade. So it's really dangerously problematic. I don't want to neglect to say that there are lots of other problems in the curriculum.
Mm-hmm. There are, yes, clearly.
Jews, but I don't want to ignore that. I don't want to make it sound as if we only think the problem is this one. It's just that this is our mandate as an entity. That's who we represent. Those are the parents and teachers who came to us. And so we're addressing this problem, but it's wide. It's problematic throughout the curriculum, as we said at the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a constant refrain, certainly among many people on the left or liberals, who claim that critics of people who are talking about critical race theory indoctrination in the schools are making it up, that it's all fiction, that there is no critical race theory indoctrination in the schools. But the ethnic studies curricula that you have been, that you have been researching and that led to this lawsuit, This is critical race theory indoctrination, isn't it? And it's going on in the public schools.
100% it is. I remember months ago there were a lot of protests. Oh, critical race theory, that's only something that was taught in law schools and at universities, and that's not what our ethnic studies. It totally is. And they admit it, they say it flat out now. So if you just do a little scratching below the surface, you can see it for yourself.
Now, one of the aspects of this that I think is very interesting is that among the entities that are behind liberated ethnic studies and behind this whole push to get this this these toxic ideas into the schools are the California teachers unions, and specifically the teachers union in Los Angeles. Isn't that the case?
Oh, yes, it is very much the case. I'm glad you said that. I had written that down. That was one of the answers to the compound question from earlier. The unions are very much a part of this. And I'm not sure why, other than I don't want to say it's simply anti Semitic. Um, there has been, as you said earlier, this serious push to have DEI in schools, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so once you have a new requirement, you have to staff it. And so that's an opportunity for more staffing, more members of the union to have higher paying positions. I imagine perhaps that has something to do with it. It is the case that the teachers' unions tend to be extremely left. I don't even know if left is the right word anymore. What's
I,
post
I guess
beyond progressive?
neo-Marxist would be
Yes,
an
that's the
even
one.
better term.
That's correct. That is what is driving this. Is very much a neo-Marxist ideology, and it's not surprisingly destructive of everything that America has been based on from the beginning. Never perfect, but always striving to improve. And the teachers union, the head of the teachers union in Los Angeles has on her official bio that she is a Black Lives Matter activist. She stated when she was first inducted as the president of this very large union that she is raising, by raising, she means the school children, not her own. She is raising social justice warriors. That's what is supposed to be happening. That's what she's in favor of having happen. She is adamant that the government version of the model curriculum is unacceptable, inauthentic, illegitimate. And it's the case with teachers' unions. Uh, I haven't yet seen a teachers' union that wholeheartedly rejects this. It's much more part of the whole package at this point. And the LA Teachers Union has tremendous amount of power.
As we saw
And
during the coronavirus pandemic, shutting down
yes,
schools and keeping them shut down with the support of their national leader, Randy Weingarten of the American Federation of Teachers,
yes, yes.
who
And in
herself
fact,
engaged, although she is herself Jewish, engaged in blaming Jews for the
right.
movement to open the schools.
Yes. Well, uh, they really did themselves a disservice because that's the reason why the parents really started looking into what was happening in the schools. They were so outraged that the schools were closed. Teachers were recorded having happy hour after they refused to open the classroom but gave out, the
Mhm.
materials for studying. Um, yes, so
And also told not to post their vacation pictures when they were teaching at home because they couldn't be with other people,
yeah,
during these closing of schools.
yes, it's they are the main drivers. They're the best organized. They have the most numbers. They know how to give directives to their members.
And they
they
have
do.
great political power, don't they?
They have incredible political power. In fact, what happened after the first model curriculum was defeated and removed, a lot of people in positions of authority, I'll put it that way, felt as if, okay, that's part of the celebration. Okay, we fought, we succeeded, we won, we're done. We're not doing this again. We're not going up against the teachers' union again. We're not going to admit that there's a problem. And rather than supporting their constituencies, they've been pretty much content to, for the most part, stay on the sidelines and say, this isn't a problem, or alternatively, if it is a problem, we're taking care of it. We know how to handle this. We have the connections. Look, the BDS resolution was removed from the United Teachers of Los Angeles from their vote. It never quite got to the vote. It was removed that day. Something happened. There was some, seems to me, my opinion, a deal must have been made. Okay, we won't do BDS now, but leave us alone on this other stuff. And so far, that's what's happened. And people were told not to bring lawsuits. And by people, I mean us, the Deborah Project. Do not bring this. It's not right. You're going to make bad law. You don't know these union leaders like we do. They're our friends. And when we said, well, we understand your position, but we're doing this anyway, it was not pretty. It was really very unpleasant.
Laura, explain to us, I mean, I guess the ordinary reader, the ordinary viewer, listener might, hear this and say, well, this sounds bad. It's debatable. But explain to us exactly why what they're doing with these curricula is illegal. Why there is a basis for a lawsuit to shut it down.
Right. Well, it's illegal on both federal law grounds and California state law grounds. It violates the First Amendment to the Constitution for equal protection and free exercise by teaching children that Israel is an illegitimate state. And by the way, they also teach, don't worry about criticizing Israel and its existence and its legitimacy, because Zionism and Judaism are distinct. They're not the same thing. And so it's not anti-Semitic to do what they're doing. Well, as we showed in our complaint, pages and pages of explanation about how the Jewish religion is based on the belief in Israel as the homeland of the Jewish people and the right for Jews to have sovereignty in that nation. And it's in every text. It's in the calendar. It's in the holidays. It's in the customs. You cannot separate Zion, that is Israel, from Judaism. So that's how we make out the equal protection claim.
Yeah, and I just jump in. Imagine any government telling any other ethnic religious group what their ethnicity or religion is, defining it for them. That would be considered the ultimate action of privilege, right?
Yes, exactly. They get to tell Jews what their religion is and isn't, and what anti-Semitism is and isn't. So it's a problem for the First Amendment, for Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, because it's about the race and religion and ethnicity, and the Jews are recognized as an ethnicity, as a group, and this denial of of the sincerely held religious beliefs of Jews about their homeland is a violation. It's also a violation of California state law, which forbids discrimination against the whole litany of race, religion, et cetera, in educational settings. That's forbidden. This is what they're doing. There's also another law in California, in the education law, that requires, if you're going to have materials, curricular materials, your own in your district, which I said earlier, every school district is entitled to have their own set of curricula, you have to present it at a public hearing, and the public has to have the right to review it and to comment on it. And then you have to have another meeting so that there can be full and fair debate, robust debate, and then a decision. So they're violating that portion of it. So, we have federal law, state law violations, and that's how we were able to bring this case. And, some other issues are problematic for people to bring. For example, discrimination against whites is a much more difficult legal argument to succeed on. Mm-hmm. But here we have absolute grounds, and
because it's discrimination against Jews, not just white people.
It's not just white people. It's
despite the attempt to brand Jews as having white privilege, erasing the entire history, basically, of the Jewish people.
Exactly. So those are all the different ways in which what's being done is a violation of the law. And sadly, most people don't recognize, either because we don't assert it enough, that Jews have the same rights under the Constitution and under these California laws as every other group that's stated explicitly. They are entitled not to be discriminated against. And it's people, I don't know why, but there is a great fear for Jews to call attention to themselves and to demand the same kind of rights that other groups are very comfortable demanding. And it's been a problem, and it's still a problem.
I think that's the old Cynthia Ozick quote of that universalism is the particularism of the Jews.
Right. Not us. Everybody else. We're worried about everybody else, but not, we don't want to make a big deal. Stop or I'll shoot. That's I think in part why cases like this haven't been brought before. But the other thing is that people had to really dig and look, and a lot of the material people weren't conscious of it until the pandemic forced people to look at what was happening in the schools.
Because they were actually seeing, looking on the computer screen and seeing what their kids were being, indoctrinated with.
Exactly.
So I guess, part of the question here for me is, it sounds terrible. It sounds utterly brazen, an open, basically incorporating hate for one group into, a curricula that is supposed to celebrate diversity. Why do these people think that they can get away with it? How is it that they think that this is something that will pass muster?
Well, because they've been right so far. Nobody said anything. People don't respond. If there's a chance that you might be called a racist in public, you will do almost anything to avoid that. And so even though there's absolute grounds to criticize what they're doing and to insist that they be truthful and follow the law and celebrate everybody, or at least don't denigrate everybody except for those groups, um, they're getting away with it. They really, I think, don't have an inkling about how bad it is. Now, the LA Teachers Union, they had experts, outside experts, do the Palestine portion of the curriculum. So that's very interesting to see how that developed. I don't think any of these other ethnic studies folks who focus on those four racialized groups really have much knowledge at all about the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
But they brought in experts, and the people they brought in are radical anti Israel activists and pro Palestinian activists. And that's where they got word for word lesson plans from these other outside groups, these viciously anti Israel outside groups. And now there's the Teachers Union, the National Educators Association, which is the flip of the American Federation of Teachers. There's two huge teachers' unions. There are efforts to bring up at the next assembly suggestions, and when I say suggestions, I mean mandates, if they get voted up, insisting that the lives of the Palestinian children, the dispossession, etc., be part of the NEA mantra, their way of teaching. It has to be inculcated pre-K through 12th grade. And they even are saying where the material should come from. And of course, it's the most anti-Israel organizations that we are very familiar with. So why shouldn't they be brazen if they get away with it?
Mm-hmm.
And they are getting away with it because, there is a lot of hostility in the stereotypes that are prevalent in certain minority communities.
Yeah.
And so Jews are a great target.
Yeah, I think unfortunately, I think much of the debate about critical race theory is focused on, in some ways falsely, well, they're just trying to teach about slavery. That's certainly not true. They're trying to divide the country in race and to ignore the progress that we've made historically on race relations in this country. But as we see how it, is sort of an overall framework for sort of leftist woke ideology, which, somehow includes the denigration of Jews, the denigration of Jewish rights, and the demonization of Israel. This is taking on sort of the aspect of a new religion and sort of a new leftist neo-Marxist faith. And like all faiths, certainly its true believers, will not tolerate heresy or dissent. And that is why they are so quick to brand anybody who opposes this as a racist, as a beneficiary of white privilege. It's an either or thing. And, as much as, there's a debate in this country about how much separation between religion and state there should be, I think what we need to separate is separate the state from this new, quasi-putative state woke religion that not only seeks to divide us, but also seeks to promote a form of anti-Semitism.
Anti-Semitism, anti-Americanism, anti-capitalism, anti-everything that we thought was good. But they clearly don't. Yeah, it's the idea that it's in the high schools and now the elementary schools and even pre-kindergarten has to frighten everybody who is concerned about this. It's not going away. And until we all start pushing back, and there are lots of groups who are quietly working under the radar to gather information and to force educators to look at what they're doing and to realize how problematic it is. But they need support, and they're not getting it.
Mhm.
And as I've told people, and this may be naive of me, but it doesn't matter because I'm going to put it out there. There have to be educators and even legislators who want this to stop, who don't want it spreading throughout America's public schools. And so, even though they will criticize the Deborah Project for bringing a case like this and others who are protesting this woke, liberatory, critical ethnic studies, they really have to be happy about it. They have to see the value in stopping what is happening because it is eroding the scores of all the school children across the country. We are getting lower and lower averages. We're falling in the rankings. We're paying attention to too many other things and not to whether or not kids are going to graduate from high school with a basic mastery of, of reading and writing and arithmetic. We're
Mhm.
falling fast and far. And so I'm hoping that they do welcome what we're doing, even if they're criticizing it. And the same,
Mhm. Go ahead.
go ahead.
Well, the question I wanted to ask when you speak of support, how much support are you and the parents and those behind this effort to push back against this? How much support are you getting from the organized Jewish community, including those organizations whose specific brief is to defend Jews against anti-Semitism?
Gee, do you have a particular one in mind?
Well, we could say the Anti-Defamation League, but I'd make it broader than that. Is the Jewish Federation in Los Angeles supporting you? Is the American Jewish Committee? I mean, what is the organized Jewish world doing about this?
Thus far, we have had, forget about support, we've had crickets. We have heard nothing from anybody about what we're trying to do, what other groups are trying to do. And in part, it's because we leapfrogged over them. We didn't ask their permission. And that's, you know,
Well, had you
that's
asked their permission, you pretty much know what the answer would have been, right?
yes, yes. So again, I think they're better. I'm sure they're happier that we didn't ask because they would have to say no. And then I'd be on this show with you telling the names of the organizations that told us not to do this. Um, in part, it's because they did celebrate early and their success has evaporated.
Mhm.
In part, they need to get along with others in the community. The Jews are never, in America, the Jews are never the largest critical mass, at least in terms of numbers. And so everyone has to like them. And the way you get these other groups to like the Jewish groups is by playing by their rules and by supporting their needs and not by demanding that others support us. That's a sad commentary. I'd love to be proved wrong. Um, but so far, as I said, no one has said a word to us about either can we work with you or maybe you didn't realize, but nothing like that. Now, stand with us. We have worked with the legal department there.
Mhm. Okay, that's important.
And yes, so I do want to say that they're very well aware this is not what Stand With Us does. They don't bring litigation. They do assist university students and others,
Mhm.
but they don't bring litigation. So that's fine. We can just share
Yeah, litigation
information.
is your job.
Litigation is our job. It's not for everyone, and it's a particular set of skills and also nerve. Um, but where we have gotten support and where I'm so pleased. There are grassroots parents groups that have been working on this for quite a long time, have done a lot of work, have a lot of information, and they have reached out and are helping uh, us with information and access to finding more people to talk to and things like that. So that's terrific. And the parents groups, they're so happy that someone is sticking their neck out in the front and willing to take the information that they have and run with it and go into court and demand that the rights of Jews are protected.
Mhm.
And
Well, I would add, obviously, a lot of these mainstream groups are supporters of Black Lives Matter, signed on to that despite the clear connection to anti-Semitism and the BDS movement, and of course
you mean
the
the organized
ADL.
groups, the parent groups.
No, no, I mean the
Yeah.
mainstream groups that signed, that are not supporting you, and of course the Anti-Defamation League files briefs at the drop of a hat about anything, sort of to as in every case trying to suppress religion in the public square, but they're certainly not behind you in terms of defending Jews against anti-Semitism in this case, even though supposedly that's still their brief.
I'm not saying that they won't appear, but we have not heard from any of
Yeah,
them.
clearly the
Um,
silence is deafening so far. Um, I guess briefly, my last question is, how optimistic are you about this struggle? I mean, we've seen in other places, like in Virginia last year, that there was sort of a broad cross section of people, a critical mass of people were opposed to critical race theory and this kind of imposition of ideology, toxic ideologies in the schools. Are you hopeful in certainly in sort of very blue California? Can your efforts succeed, or is this just part of a long struggle where we won't necessarily win every fight, but we have to keep it up?
Um, well, I don't know if this particular case if we're going to prevail here. We've already won by bringing the lawsuit, by putting people on notice that you're not going to get away with this, by exposing the toxicity of the materials that they are trying to force feed elementary school children about hatred of other groups. That's a win. No school district now can say, oh, we didn't know. We didn't realize. They came to us prepared. So I have to say, we have already won, and we are not finished fighting. There are lots of school districts, there are lots of efforts in which we can uproot this material, educate parents. The best, you know, Jewish parents will hide from a lot, but not when you attack their children. When you put their children's safety at risk, that's serious. And so we are talking to lots of parents who are concerned. We heard, once we filed the lawsuit, we heard from parents and teachers and administrators across the state of California saying, what information do you need? Are you going to bring a case in our district? How can we help? I mean, it's amazing. So it's already been a win. I hope we'll continue winning. There will be many other fronts that will be opened in this battle, but um, I'm very glad that it's begun.
Yes, and I think a lot of our viewers are with you on that. Lori, I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us today, and good luck in this fight, and keep at it. And we'll be monitoring what you do, and hopefully have you back on at some point to update us. We also want to thank our audience, whether you're listening to us on Spotify or any of the other podcast platforms, or watching us live on Facebook or Twitter, or on the JNS YouTube channel, or on JBS TV. Please like and or subscribe to Top Story, give us good reviews. Please write to us at editor@jns.org and let us know where you listen or watch the show and what you think about it. Top Story will be back in 2 weeks after the July 4th holiday with guest host Melanie Phillips. I'll be back at the end of July after my vacation. And until then, keep reading and thinking for yourself, and we'll see you soon.